Hi, I'm John Townsend, and today we're embarking on a series about baking and roasting in this very versatile utensil here, the Dutch oven. Thanks for joining us today on 18th Century Cooking. There's a very interesting book that was published in the early 19th century. It was published in 1837, but it was actually written in 1832, and it's by Katherine Strickland Parr. It's called The Backwoods of Canada. And she originally wrote this book as a series of letters to her sister talking about life on the frontier in Canada. And it's really amazing. She has a whole section of the book where she talks about Dutch ovens, or she calls them bake kettles. Now, as a regular proper English woman, she probably wouldn't have used something like this in her regular home. But she definitely found they were amazingly useful on the frontier. And let's hear a little bit about what she says about bake kettles. She says, "At first I was inclined to grumble and rebel against the expediency of bake pans or bake kettles. But as cooking stoves, iron stoves, and even brick and clay-built ovens will not start up at your bidding in the bush, these substitutes are valuable and perform a number of uses. I have eaten excellent light bread baked on immigrant hearths in one of these kettles. I have eaten boiled potatoes, baked meats, excellent stews, good soups, and all cooked at different times in this universally useful utensil. So let it not be despised. It is one of those things particularly adapted to the circumstances of settlers in the bush before they have collected those comforts about their homesteads within and without, that are the reward and the slow gleaning up of many years' toil." So you can see how much she loved to use this very versatile tool. And it's one thing to, say, fry in one of these, or bake a soup, cook a soup or a stew in a kettle like this. But it's another thing to learn how to bake and to roast it, where you really have to regulate the temperatures. That's what we'll be focusing on today. Again, it might not seem that easy, but with a little study, we'll get it. So let's look at the anatomy of this Dutch oven for a little bit before we get started warming it up. You can see that it's got a lid. It's a special lid. Dutch ovens, this lid, this idea, the rim on here is specifically so that we can put coals up on top of this and them not fall off. This really is sort of an American invention right there in the late 18th century and early 19th century. It really kind of sets these apart and makes them specifically good for this purpose. So this helps with the specific idea of Dutch oven baking, which is that we want to have heat underneath the cooking pot and we want to have coals up on top to give you heat from both directions. Now, one of the things that'll happen is once you get this idea, you'll think, well, I know, I'll just pile coals up on top of this pot. And that really is the problem. We don't want to have too much on top, or else we'll just overheat this. We'll get too much heat in too rapidly and burn whatever we're cooking. So it really is a balance between getting enough heat below and above, but not too much. That's what we're going to be studying here in just a moment. Another thing we really need to bake in this properly is a good bed of coals. So you have a lot of pre-prepared coals. You can't cook with flaming logs. You really need to have a nice deep bed of coals, and coals you can keep getting from the fire. So if you don't have a good bank of them ready to go, then you might run out just when you needed more. Also, there are environmental factors to take into consideration. Ambient temperature outside really isn't that important that you have to really keep in mind, but wind is. If you've got a lot of wind coming in, it'll hit that pot and take away the heat, and so it can be very difficult to bake. So if you've got a windy situation, you're going to need to protect that Dutch oven baking area from a lot of that wind. You'll need to make some kind of a windbreak. If you go searching online, you'll likely find formulas for baking with Dutch ovens. And the formula usually goes something like this. If you want to get to 350 degrees, you take the inches of your Dutch oven, say a 10-inch Dutch oven, and you put 3 up and 3 down. You take the number of inches, take 10 charcoal briquettes, and for the top you'd put 13 on, and you'd do 7 underneath, so 3 minus and 3 plus. But since we're not using charcoal briquettes, usually in a historic atmosphere like this, we're going to be using hardwood coals. So they aren't the same size as a charcoal briquette, and they usually burn much hotter. So we have to experiment more. We have to use our experience to get the right temperature. So when we're baking in a Dutch oven, we're trying to get the air temperature inside the Dutch oven to oven temperatures, right? 300, 350 degrees. We don't actually usually want to have our actual food right up against the side of the Dutch oven. And so we want to bring our food up off of the floor, away from the walls. So many times we'll use a trivet, something like this. Sometimes we could use little stones and a baking dish, especially if we're baking bread or some kind of pie in our oven. We want to have the pie plate up off the bottom with a trivet, and we want to bake in something like this. Again, we're trying to get the air temperature up to the right. To give you an idea what's happening inside the Dutch oven, we've actually got a modern heat probe in here and a little device, so we can actually read the temperature of the inside of the Dutch oven as we put coals on top and underneath. We can watch, and that will give us an idea about exactly what we're going to do in the future. Let's start off experimenting with just a scoopful of coals down below that we'll spread out, and another scoopful that we will spread on the top of the lid here, and make sure they're all around the edge, not necessarily in the center. There you go. It's only been a minute or two, and just that handful of coals has already raised the temperature 160 degrees and still going higher. Okay, our temperature seemed to level off at about 200 degrees, so let's put another scoopful, a light scoopful, on the lid and see what happens. So it's been 10 minutes, so we've had just one scoop at the bottom, 2 scoops on top. Our temperature is already to 260 degrees, so you can see it really doesn't take too long to get it up to almost baking temperatures. Obviously, we'll need a little bit more to get it to where we would want to bake bread or something. You have to really be careful about taking the lid off and checking your baking a lot. If you do that, you'll extend the baking period a great deal because the temperature will go down inside the oven a lot. Well, we're just about to 350 degrees in the internal temperature here. We've got 2 scoops of hardwood coals underneath and 3 scoops up on the lid. And this is a 12-inch Dutch oven. If you're working with a smaller Dutch oven, obviously, you'll need fewer coals, and a bigger one, obviously more coals. And as these coals die down, they'll need to be replenished. So you can see you have to be watching this all the time. And the more you bake like this, the easier it will become. So there's a lot of heat, not only going down from the lid of this, but coming up off of the lid. And one of the beauties of Dutch ovens is you can stack them up to conserve your coals, so that this set of coals on this lid will actually be the bottom coals for another Dutch oven that's up on top. So we preheated this oven. It's well up into temperature. In fact, what we'd like to do is go ahead and bake bread while this is hot. Now, bread needs to be really hot, 450, 425 degrees. So we put an extra scoop down below and an extra scoop on top. Now with this 12-inch Dutch oven, it's completely level on top, and it should be about up to temperature. And I've got some dough that's already ready to go in the oven. This is risen, so let's get it in the oven and get it baking. Well, here's the bread. It's not right out of the oven because I let it cool down. It's still really, really warm. The problem with baking bread at an event is you really need to let it totally cool off, maybe even all night long until the next day for the crumb to set up. Now I'm gonna cheat. I'm gonna rip this bread open and we're gonna have some right away. It smells wonderful. It's still steaming inside. The crumb had set up enough, so it should be perfect. Bread right out of the oven. Wow. This bread was really was not so difficult at all in the Dutch oven. You have to pay attention to it. You have to have a little experience, and you have to do some. You probably have to fail on 3 or 4 loaves before you get it. This one probably could use just a little bit more heat underneath. But again, I mean, we're still learning, and it is so simple, and you can do it at an event without great quantities of equipment. Just a simple Dutch oven. Bread is so wonderful when you can bake it at an event. I'm telling you, everybody will love you. I want to thank you for coming along as we continue to experiment and have these experiences with this food as we savor the flavors and the aromas of the 18th century. If you're new to our channel, I want to welcome you. You can subscribe by clicking the button right up here. Also check out our related videos. Thanks so much for watching.